This is part two of the presentation on the coming of the Civil War. In the 1850s, as a result of especially the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but the other divisive events of the decade, the Whig Party was completely destroyed. Uh, they simply could not hold together. The Northern Whigs were appalled by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Southern Whigs were for it. They couldn't even speak to each other after this. So the Whig Party simply came apart. There was no more basis for unity. As long as they had issues they could agree on, like the national bank or the tariff or internal improvements, then they could remain a political party. But when slavery became the big issue, they could not stay together. The Democrats were damaged badly also by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but they managed to survive as a unified or as one political party until 1860, when they too were destroyed. They split completely in two that year. Now, there were two political parties that might have filled the void left by the destruction of the Whig Party. One was called the American Party. They were known as the Know Nothings. They ran a presidential candidate, a former president, Millard Fillmore, in 1856, and their big issue was immigration. They were opposed to it. They were what is called nativists, people who are hostile to immigrants, especially Catholic immigrants, especially Irish immigrants. But the other new political party was the Republicans. They were born out of the ashes of the Whig Party. They also got support from some former Know Nothings. They got support from some former Northern Democrats. And they were the party that survived of these two new ones. The Know Nothings withered away. The Republicans in 1856 ran John C. Fremont for president. He was from California. He was a war hero in the Mexican-American War. Now, the Republicans prospered while the Know Nothings disappeared because their issue, the opposition to the expansion of slavery to the territories, captured the nation's attention, and immigration faded as an issue. That was the Republicans' major platform issue. Uh, they were opposed to expanding slavery to the territories. They mostly didn't like slavery, but in many cases were willing to tolerate it where it already existed, but they were not willing to see it expand. Now, a basic difference between the Republicans and the Whigs is that the Whigs were a national party. They had members in both North and South. The Republicans were not at this point in their history. They had support only in the North. Now, in the election of 1856, the candidates were Buchanan, James Buchanan. He was for the Kansas-Nebraska Act. John C. Fremont was strongly opposed to it and opposed to any expansion of slavery to the territories. And Millard Fillmore was willing to tolerate it and wanted support in both North and South. Now, Buchanan won only 4 northern states, but that was enough because he won all the southern states, and Fremont won no southern states. This is a map of the election. Actually, Millard Fillmore, the Know Nothing, did win one slave state, Maryland, but all the other slave states were won by James Buchanan, plus the critical northern states of Pennsylvania, his home state, New Jersey, Indiana, and Illinois. And that was enough to give him the presidency. 2 days after Buchanan was inaugurated, the Supreme Court handed down what many historians view as the worst decision in its entire history. Dred Scott was a slave who had been taken by his master to the north. to the Louisiana Territory, in a part of the Louisiana Territory north of the Missouri Compromise line, where slavery was illegal. And he had been kept there not just briefly, but for years. Now, abolitionists sued for his freedom based on the Missouri Compromise. It was illegal to hold slaves up there. They were interested in creating a test case, a case that would establish a principle that could then be applied to other slaves in a similar situation. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. This is Dred Scott on the left, and the man on the right is Roger Taney, pronounced Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was from Maryland, a slave state, and he was a strong defender of slavery. Now, in this decision, which it was very complex, but by some measures it was a 7-2 decision, by other measures 6-3. At any rate, it was handed down immediately after Buchanan's inauguration. And it turned out that Buchanan had consulted on the case with a Supreme Court justice beforehand, which was highly irregular. In most, I believe, constitutional historians would consider that to be a violation of the principle of the separation of powers between the executive branch and the judicial branch. Taney ruled in the case that Dred Scott was not a citizen, and because he was not a citizen, he could not sue in court. So that was the end of it. His case was thrown out. Now, that was enough to decide the case, but Taney intentionally went beyond this, far beyond it, which courts usually don't do. But he was trying to make a larger political point here. He reasoned that slaves could never be citizens because they were property. And that black persons, not just slaves, could not be citizens because they had never been citizens. Now, this was factually wrong. They had voted in many states, even in North Carolina, a southern slave state, until 1835, they had the right to vote. They had fulfilled many of the duties and privileges of citizenship, but Taney decided that they could not be citizens. He said that slavery was a property right protected by the U.S. Constitution, and therefore there was no such thing as a free territory. He also said that the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional, and that was an unnecessary statement because it had been repealed 3 years earlier in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So clearly Roger Taney is going out of his way to make a political statement defending slavery. The reaction to the decision was that the South was absolutely overjoyed. They no longer worried about slave states and free states. They boasted, quite wrongly, that there would be slave auctions in the Boston Common. That's a park in the center of Boston, which was known as one of the centers of abolitionism. That could not have happened. The citizens of Boston would not have allowed it. The North was furious. Free black people were terrified of possibly being enslaved as a result of this decision. Some of them went to Canada. Now, the following year, this matter was debated hotly in the Senate race in the state of Illinois. Abraham Lincoln argued against any expansion of slavery to the territories. He was a Republican, and he was being consistent with the Republican position on this. Stephen Douglas, whom we've seen before, the creator of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, favored popular sovereignty. Now, Douglas won the election, which at that time was held in the state legislature. That's how senators were elected. But it's worth pointing out that both Lincoln and Douglas had positions that were at odds with the Dred Scott decision. They simply chose not to honor it. Lincoln said there should be no expansion of slavery to the territories, and the Dred Scott decision had said that all territories were open to slavery. And Douglas said that people should decide the question of slavery there. And the Dred Scott decision said, no, all territories are open to slavery, whatever the people thought. As if the country were not divided enough, there was another divisive factor the following year, and that was John Brown's raid. In 1859, he seized the Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Originally, he had 50 men. It dwindled to 19. The plan was to gain weapons and begin a major slave uprising and somehow overturn slavery through this means. It never had a chance to work. Some people who respected and supported Brown a great deal understood this. One of them was Frederick Douglass. Federal troops overwhelmed this small group of raiders, and the result was an even greater polarization between North and South. Brown was hanged in a trial conducted by the state of Virginia about a month and a half after the raid. In early December 1859, the North celebrated him. There was a song that you can listen to here if you follow the PDF version of this, called John Brown's Body, to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Some people in the North saw him as a martyr. Church bells tolled at the moment that he was being executed. The South, however, was outraged by this. They felt that it was impossible to negotiate with the North, and they began to prepare for war.